As you can see behind me, we're getting ready for the Christmas season, and we're wrapping up this series that we've done all semester called Tell Me Something Good. And tonight's going to be the last full week of that, and then our Christmas party will kind of wrap it up with some prophecies from Isaiah. Tonight we're going to look at Daniel in the Lion's Den. We're going to call it In the Lion's Den. We're going to be in Daniel 1 and Daniel 6. And we're going to talk about how Daniel was a man of integrity who trusted and served God regardless of what it cost him. And we're going to go back to Daniel 1, which we talked about last time with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to kind of set things up. And the first thing that we need to talk about with Daniel is that he started young. In chapter 1, we find him in captivity in Babylon. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, decided to bring in some of the Israelites. It says, from the royal family and nobility, young men without any physical defect, good-looking, suitable for instruction in all wisdom, knowledgeable, perceptive, capable of serving in the king's palace. He would teach them the Chaldean language and literature. He assigned them daily provisions from the royal food and drink and wine that they drank. They were to be trained for 3 years, and at the end of that time, they were to attend the king. Among them from the Judahites were Daniel. And I'm going to stop there. The king wanted the best of the best, young, smart, good-looking, easily trained and educated and disciplined and so forth. And Daniel fit this. It says, without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, qualified to serve in the king's palace. He got special attention. He got special training. He got special equipping from the king. He impressed the king. So he impressed the king. Second thing, he was disciplined and committed. 8 through 16, he and his friends decide they're not going to defile themselves with the king's food or drink. Ask permission not to defile themselves. They get that permission. They're tested for 10 days. At the end of 10 days, it says in verse 15, they looked better and healthier than all the young men. So the guard continued to remove their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. They were disciplined. They were committed. They resolved not to eat the king's food, drink his drink. Imagine how hard this is. They're standing up against everybody else. They're standing up against the king himself and his orders. But they were committed. They were committed to the authorities, yes, and they respected them, but they were more committed to God. And following God's plan for them was more important than following the king's plan. If we're going to be the type of people God wants us to be, spiritual people, we have to also be disciplined people, committed people. The third thing, he knew that God was in control. Over in chapter 2, this short psalm-like hymn type thing that Daniel says, starting in verse 20, it says, he declared, may the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. He changes the times and seasons. He removes kings and establishes kings, gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you've let me know what we have asked of you, for you have let us know the king's mystery. It says things like wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets up kings and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to the discerning, reveals deep and hidden things, knows what lies in darkness, light dwells within him. You've given wisdom and power, you've made known to me. In all of this, he's honoring God, he's worshiping him, he's recognizing who God is and praising him. So that's kind of some setup on Daniel. The second thing I want us to pivot and talk about is Daniel's faith, and it was deeply rooted. He wouldn't compromise his convictions for anyone. We've already talked about the decision not to eat the king's food, drink his wine. He never would compromise his character for anyone, both in chapter 1 and then later in chapter 6. He's a person of integrity. He had strong beliefs. He wouldn't bend on them. He stood his ground against the king's orders. He refused to dismiss this as just a minor point and go along with it. He held to his previous convictions that he already had. Godly convictions, unbendable convictions, things they wouldn't relax for anyone, unchangeable, no-brainers. And that's what we need to do. We need to know in advance how we're going to respond. Second thing, he refused to worship anything over God. Over in chapter 6, there's the story that leads to the lion's den. It says this document had been signed. It says it's a law, irrevocable, can't be changed. And they set this up that for 30 days, anyone who petitions any god or man except for the king would be thrown into the lion's den. It says, when Daniel learned the document had been signed, he went into his house, the windows opened towards Jerusalem, and 3 times a day got down on his knees, prayed, gave thanks to God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel petitioning and imploring his God. His faith was the real deal. It was the most important thing. His enemies tried to catch him. They tried to set him up. They tried to make him compromise. And he stayed true and did what he always did. He didn't change anything. He didn't compromise anything, despite the cost. Our worship, our service to God has to be first and foremost, and it can't be anything that we compromise. No devotion to anything else, no idols, nothing can get in the way of our devotion to him. The next thing, he was willing to give his life for God. 12 through 18 of chapter 6. They approached the king and asked about his edict. Didn't you sign an edict? Blah, blah, blah. King said, yes, the order stands. They said, Daniel has ignored you. He prays 3 times a day. Basically, they go tattle on him. And it says, as soon as the king heard this, he was displeased. He set his mind on rescuing Daniel, made every effort. And then he knew that he couldn't go against what had been signed into law, so he had to do it. It says, the king gave the order. They brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you continually serve, rescue you. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing in regard to Daniel could be changed. Then the king went to his palace, spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and he could not sleep. He gets up the next morning. He sees we'll get to that in just a second. He's willing to give his life for God. He didn't mind upsetting human beings as long as he didn't displease God. He's willing to take any persecution, even death, to stand up for God. He's willing to face the lions. He's willing to face death even. His confidence is not in this life, but in the life beyond this. And God honors Daniel's faith. He rewards his discipline and his commitment. In chapter 1, whenever the 10 days of testing are done, he's in better shape, mentally, physically, all of that, than the other guys were. Later, it says he was given special understanding and knowledge. He interprets dreams, things like that. He becomes an advisor and a leader under a couple different kings. He was as high as second or third in the land. His commitment and discipline was rewarded in big ways for trusting God. Second thing, he spared Daniel's life. Chapter 6, 19 through 24. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he reached the den, he cried out in anguish to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you continually serve, been able to rescue you? Daniel spoke with the king. May the king live forever. My God sent his angels, shut the lions' mouths, and they haven't harmed me, for I was found innocent before him, and also before you I have not done harm. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to take Daniel out of the den. When he was brought up from the den, he was found to be unharmed, for he trusted in his God. The king gave the command, and those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the lions' den. They, their children, and their wives. They had not reached the bottom of the den before the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Daniel should have been devoured just like those later people were within minutes of being thrown into the lion's den. He survived an entire night. He escapes unharmed an entire night. The God who Daniel served made these mighty lions like meowing kittens, and Daniel was able to survive. He did the miraculous. Daniel's faith, Daniel's confidence was in God, that God could intervene. He enters the lion's den with calm assurance of his sovereign protector in his place. He spared Daniel's life. And then the third way he honors Daniel's faith is that twice he helped turn others towards God. Daniel 4, 34 through 37, Daniel 6, 25 through 28. Rulers and nations turn to God because of Daniel. He's spared to make a difference. God has a plan for him as he helps turn others to God, which is one of our purposes too. God wants us, if we've found him, to help turn others towards him. So think about this as we wrap this up. If a law was passed today that prohibited praying to God or living for him in public, honestly, for most people, even those who claim Christ, it would make no difference at all in their day-to-day lives. God is interested in being more than just a casual part of our lives. He wants to make a difference in our lives. He wants us, like Daniel, to be willing to do anything for him, stand up for him, give anything to be or do whatever God asks of him, regardless of the cost. If we're living for him, when things happen in our lives, they won't change our commitment. We'll continue being ourselves. We'll continue being a representative of him, of the likeness of Christ, and that will not change. We would do well to remember what I ran across in studying. Someone labeled it the 4 C's. Consider the choice, compare it to God, commit to God's ways, and count on God's control. There's really only one option: to do it God's way regardless. Dare to be like Daniel, not because of who Daniel is, but because of who his God is. To stand alone, to live a purposeful, unashamed life, even when others don't. To not back down for anything. To be true to your convictions, to do your best regardless of the circumstances, to build a reputation of character and integrity. Pray regularly and trust God for the results, and stand strong for him. Just like Daniel did, just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, just like so many others have over time.